Hey, welcome to the video. In today's video, we'll talk about Kivy and how to implement a RecycleView. And the app that we will be applying this to is a real-world app that we've discussed in the previous video, and the link is in the description below, where we show you how to retrieve Wi-Fi passwords in Windows. Check it out.
I've set up the basic structure of our Kivy app, and I'll walk you quickly through that so you don't have to watch me code all the time. So we import re and subprocess, which we will need. We import the usual Kivy stuff, so Kivy itself, to get the Kivy require 2.1.0. That is the version I'm working with. Of course, I import my RecycleView. I import the app and the builder, and I'm going to use a screen and a label. I then set up my classes. I'm going to have an RV screen, which is the screen that will hold the RecycleView, and that inherits from screen. I'm going to pass for now. I'm also going to have an RV label. That is the class that represents the label that will show up in the RecycleView. So your RecycleView can show labels, it can show buttons. In my case, I'm showing a label, and I'm creating a special label for that, just so I can give it some color and stuff, and we'll come back to that in a second. So that's what RV label is. Then there's a class RecycleView, that is clearly the main class. And then there is my app, which inherits from app. I have my build function. I give it a quick title, and I return the load file functionality from the builder object, and that links to my GUI KV file, which is on the right hand side here. I then use the if name equals main statement, as I always do, and then I instantiate my app and then call the run method. So that's the basic setup in Python. What do we do in Kivy? The first thing I do is I create a template for my RV label. And all I'm doing here really is give it a background. So this is light gray. And I also give it a border, which is red. Then let's move on to the template for my RV screen. So this is the screen that holds the RecycleView. It's a box layout which first has a label, which is just my title with some formatting here, a background. And then the RV itself, so the RecycleView. Again, I start with some formatting. I give it a border, which is a blue border, as you can see here. And then we get to the crux of it. For my RecycleView, there are a number of important properties we need to populate. So those are these ones here. Firstly, I give it an ID, then the view class. And as view class, that is basically what kind of object will you be showing in your RecycleView. So I'm choosing labels, and in particular, I choose the RV label, which is a template I define at the top of the Kivy file. Data is where the RecycleView will get its data from, and for that, I will use an RV data list, so a list. And that is self, so I inherit from self, which is RV. So I will have to create that in the RV class here in Python. There's two ways of doing that, and I will show you both. And then here below that is just some formatting of my RecycleView. Then the root of my application is a box layout, which just shows my RV screen. So that's the standard layout. We won't need to change anything in the Kivy file. The important pieces here are these two, and in particular this section here, the RV data list. So I'm going to make this Kivy section a bit smaller and move on to the Python side. So let's have a look at the RV class. So the first thing to say is that I have another video that talks about how to pass variables between Kivy and Python, and today we'll touch on two of those methods, but that video goes into more detail. The second important point, what do we need for a RecycleView? How do you get data into a RecycleView? For that, you need a list of dictionaries. And the way that works, as I've written out here, is you have a list. As you can see, this is a list. If I scroll to the end, you have a list that ends here. And in this list, I have 3 dictionaries. I've just chosen 3 in this example, so you will need the first dictionary, which will refer to the first element in your RecycleView. And of that dictionary represents the properties. So one of the properties is text. And what is that text going to show? Well, it is text for label 1. Okay, so that's just the default value. We'll have to populate what the text will need to be, of course. Then for the second element in my recycle view, so in my case, elements are labels, because I've set the view class equal to RV label. It'll be a dictionary, again, with the text property, or this is the key, and the value of that key is going to be whatever needs to show up on label 2, and so on for label 3 and label 4. So how many dictionaries do I need in this list? Well, that is the number of items you will see in your recycle view, and this is not necessarily fixed. And in the app that we're applying it to here, the app that recovers Wi-Fi passwords, it will depend on how many Wi-Fi networks you've been on. Okay, so it's not a fixed number. So let's look at two ways of passing variables between Kivy and Python. First, I'm going to use instance properties, which is probably what you're more familiar with, because that is just using classes. And then let's use Kivy properties, which arguably is a bit easier, although it is not necessarily my preferred method. But by all means, tell me which is the method you prefer and why, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so let's use instance properties first. Now, if we want to use instance properties, we're going to need the init function. Remember, we are in a class RV, and this class inherits from RecycleView. So we need to make sure we get the inheritance. Okay, so the way you do that, as always, you do your init function. You use self because we are using instance properties, and then you also pull through the keyword arguments. So we are inheriting from RecycleView, so we need to make sure we pull through all those properties from the superclass, which is my parent class. You use that by using super and then not eonit, init, and you pull through the keyword arguments as well. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to create a list. Which list do I want to create? Well, let's scroll back over here. I want this RV underscore data underscore list. That's a list I need to create, and that list needs to be of the format that I describe up here. So let's create it. We are working with instance properties, so we use self, and then the name of the list was RV data list. And now I'm going to have to populate that. Now I'm going to use a list comprehension because I need this to be a list. Okay, so first, let's start with that. It's a list. And what do I need? Well, I've set out the structure here. So I'm going to need a dictionary. Let's copy that. All my elements need to be dictionaries. So it's going to be like this. Now this was default text. So I'm going to replace that with a variable. Let's call it res from result. And that is for res in some other list. But which list is that? Well, for that, we're going to use a function, which I will show to you in a second, that does all the calculations and of which the output or the return is a list of text where it shows the network and the password in one string. Okay, so for res in, and the name of that function is down here, it's get RV data. So this is a function within my class. Remember, this is the top of the class. So in here, again, I'm going to use self, and from that, I'm going to get that function. So this list now uses this function here, which is this function here, and this function returns a list. I will show you that function in a second. So this list comprehension, therefore, runs through every element in this list, and I've referred to that as res. And for each res, it's going to apply this function, which is just creating a dictionary, and that is going to store that in this list. So this is how this list comprehension works. Now, to quickly show you what the getRVData function does, this was discussed in a lot of detail in another video, and the link to that video is in the description. But what this function does is it runs shell commands in Python using subprocess. Okay, and it applies regex to then extract the passwords and the network names from your file. So I'm not going to go through that in detail again, but please do check out the other video. Importantly here is it returns a result. And this result, as you can tell from here, is a list because it starts with an empty list and then it appends list elements to it. What do the list elements look like? Well, they are an F string. And the S string is a combination of the network, and it then shows me the network name, and then dash password, and it shows me the password. So this long text string is one list element, which then via this function here feeds into this list comprehension. We then stick that into the dictionary using res, and therefore that is what will show up in our labels. Okay, so that's how that works. So I'll just hide that function for now. The method we are currently using is we use instance properties, in which case this needs to be an instance method, and we need to add the word self to it. And if everything's working well, that should run just fine. So this is what we get. We have the label at the top in light gray. We have a blue border around the RecycleView. We then have 3 buttons with a light gray background and a red border around it, and they would show a text string which says network, and then it shows me a network, and then password, and then it shows me the password. So that's how you build a very quick Kivy app with a RecycleView to show you the recovered passwords from the networks that your laptop has been on. Now, I'll show you a second way of doing this. It will give you the exact same output, but it's just a different way of coding, and that is using Kivy properties. So I've made a note here of all the changes that you will need to make. Now, the important thing to understand is that this is no longer a instance property, it's a Kivy property. So all the self references will need to go. But the first thing we need to do is, well, import the list property. So from Kivy properties, we import list property. Okay. Now, I'm going to comment this out because we're no longer going to need that. And I'm going to do first the thing I always forget, and that is to remove self from here, because this is no longer an instance function because we are using Kivy properties and not instance properties. So I've gotten rid of the init function. I've removed self from there. So I will, of course, need to create my list property. At the top of the class, I'll say that that list name is rvDataList, right? I'm going to say that that is a list property. So this is the equivalent of defining it here with self.rv.datalist and then saying it's a list. I'm just telling Python here that this is going to be a Kivy list property. Now, of course, we haven't populated anything in there, and actually that is a better way of defining that with the default value of empty. Now, the second thing we then have to do is build this list comprehension. Okay, so I'll just copy this and start from that. And I'm going to put that here. And I will tell you now that it won't work. But so we're no longer using instances. So let's get rid of self. And let's get rid of self. Okay, we apply the exact same list comprehension. The logic is exactly the same as before. And it's just that I have 2 statements now, one where I define that this is a list property, and the second one where I give it the list comprehension. And you can already see the red squiggly line here. Get RV data as an unresolved reference. Well, why is that? Because it's right here, okay, and it's in the same class. So why is it not seeing that as a reference? That's because we're no longer using instances, okay? So because I don't have the self anymore, you can't refer to it in this way. So what you need to do is you actually need to move this to below this function. Okay, now that it's below there, you can see that it does pick that up. You will have noticed that I have not removed self here in the Kivy file. In Kivy, we haven't changed anything. We're doing the exact same thing, and self here refers to the RV class here. Okay, that is different from within the class in Python. So within the Kivy file, nothing changes. If you want to pass variables using Kivy properties or instance properties, it's the same thing in the Kivy file, but we need to change our Python file. So what does that give us? Exactly the same thing. So those are two ways of passing variables between Kivy and Python. I did say I was going to come back to why I prefer the instance methods. It is just a personal reference, and by all means leave a comment about what you prefer. It's just, for me, it's a more Pythonic way of doing it. One, it's using classes in its traditional fashion, which is just something I'm more familiar with, to be honest with you. Also, I don't have to worry about where I put this statement here. I have to put it after this function, which is not very object oriented, but you know, it does require less code. You don't have the what some people call the ugly init function. Some people panic a little bit when they see an init function with star quargs. If that's the case, please let me know. I'm happy to do a video on that because it's actually very straightforward. So there you go. That's why I prefer the instance properties method, but by all means use the Kivy method if that works better for you. I hope you found that helpful, or at least interesting. If you did, please leave a comment or like the video, or even consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks very much for your time. See you soon. Bye.